Hi, welcome back to Judas of Disturbia. I am Raf, and this episode is all about Yoko Ono and John Lennon. Recently I've been pretty interested in doing an episode about them, about their relationship, which at the end of the day feels like legendary but also mysterious. A lot of people make comments about this relationship. Did Yoko Ono broke up the Beatles? What did really happen in there? What about the talent of Yoko Ono? There are so many things about this. What about the collaboration, the artistic collaborations between Yoko and John? Were John Lennon's years with Yoko the best years of his career artistically? Were those the best years of his life personally? There are so many questions, and I wanted to make a video and talk about their relationship. But in a way or another, I didn't want my video to be, how to say it, so structured. I didn't want to start telling you, oh, they met this day, they did this, they were at this place, this person introduced them. I didn't want that. I wanted to talk about this from a different approach. And then in the August 29, 2022 issue of The New Yorker, I found a series of vintage articles that they published again. And in those articles, I found one article by Hendrik Hertzberg that had been published in the issue of January 8 of 1972, and it is called Everywhere's Somewhere. And it's about John Lennon and Yoko Ono when they moved to New York. Recently, when this article was published, they had moved to New York, so at the beginning of the 1970s. I do not know if the apartment where they were living, and that is going to be mentioned in this article, is the same apartment in which John was famously shot outside. But I have had these articles already for a few months. I have read it a couple of times. I find it really interesting, and I didn't want to search too much into it. I wanted to make an episode talking about this article. I wanted to talk about them, but I didn't know how to do it. And then I realized that maybe the best way to do it is just to read it with you, to go line by line on this article, telling you everything I think about several places of the article, and just basically start this way the story about these two legends of music and pop culture. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start reading the article and commenting it with you. If you have anything else to comment, you know how to do it. Just give me a 5-star review on the podcast, leave me a positive comment, or just leave me a comment giving your opinion on this article or about anything that I commented about it. So let's just start. I just wanna make it pretty fast, pretty easy, pretty clear, pretty to the point. So let's start. I have the magazine in my hand. The article starts with a piece of a song that I guess was written and performed by a hippie street singer named David Peel, who I guess also wrote the song. And he had a band, I guess, that was called David Peel and the Lower East Side. And actually, there is a video on YouTube where you can see John and Yoko, and they are like producing an album on a studio, and this guy David Peel is in there, and he is singing specifically this song. And this little part of the song basically says, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, New York City are your people, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, New York is your friend. And I think that starting this article with this little paragraph, what it actually does is telling us that people was actually pretty happy when they moved to New York, and that the scene of everything that was happening in New York at the beginning of the 1970s was pretty welcoming of Yoko and John moving in there. So let's keep going with the reading. Some good local news for a change. John Lennon and his wife and co-worker Yoko Ono have become, for most practical purposes, New Yorkers. They have been living here more or less continuously for past 6 months. They have rented a studio in the West Village to live in and a loft in SoHo to work in. So, like I said before, I don't know if this apartment where they were living is the apartment where he was killed outside, to be honest. I don't know. You let me know if you know. Let me know in the comments. They have been observed doing New York things, such as riding their bicycles in the park. What is more New York than riding bicycles in the park, skating in the park, going to the movies in the middle of the night, and picking up Sunday papers in the Sheridan Square. So far, they have not been heard to complain that the city is unlivable. When that happens, know that they are here to stay. Of course, I mean, if they are not complaining, it's because they like it. And actually, now we're gonna keep reading and we're gonna see how much they talk about New York being like the best place to live. So, yeah, of course, they are not complaining. On a recent Saturday, we went down to the West Village to see for ourselves how they are getting along in their new home. A long-haired retainer opened the door and steered us toward the curtain in the rear. So this is something that I don't understand. Is this like someone that works for them? I honestly don't know that detail, but someone opened the door for them. We dug through it into what is surely one of the pleasant rooms. I'm changing the page. One of the pleasant rooms in town. It is a studio in the old romantic way. High ceiling with serrated skylights, trees outside the window, and a cast iron circular stairway, painted muddy green leading to the roof. This sounds like a gorgeous place. The walls are beige, trimmed in the same muddy green. Sounds cool. There was a relaxed dishevelment, piles of clothing, electronic equipment, and a guitar, magazines in English and Japanese. The only uncluttered horizontal surface was a bed, big and solid, which jutted into the room like the stage in a theater in the round. This is pretty interesting. They are basically describing them like their apartment was pretty cluttered, and that the only thing uncluttered was the bed. It's pretty awesome how he describes the bed feeling like a stage in the middle of a theater, of one of those circular theaters. And then everything around, looking at them, it's all the pile of clothing, music equipment, etc. Okay, but for whatever reason, you know what? I love the music of the Beatles. I am not an expert on their lives. I don't know a lot about their lives. I don't know the details, but I don't know why I don't feel surprised for someone to tell me that John Lennon's and Yoko Ono house would be a little bit cluttered. It doesn't surprise me, and I'm not saying it in a bad way. I am saying it because of the way that I understand certain concepts of freedom. Let's keep going. So he keeps describing the place. He says, a television set, picture on, sound off, perched at the foot, a printer's box. John Lennon wearing jeans and a blue tank top sat cross-legged on the bed. That is a nice image, like pretty iconic. He was a trifle smaller than we had expected. His skin was ruddier, his hair was faded, but his face was as familiar as an old friend's. Joko, dressed in green, lounged beside him. We pull up a chair. This is pretty interesting. He first described how the bed was like on a stage, and now who's on the stage? John Lennon, Yoko Ono next to him. Maybe this is just a way in which the writer was describing the scene, or maybe this was intentional to just put it like that, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is the collaboration artistically of the couple. So we're seeing them on a stage and they are there together, one next to the other. Pretty interesting, and I like the image. It sounds like it looks iconic. The interviewer starts with the questions. He asks, why did you choose New York to live in? We ask, we love it, and it is the center of our world. John said, you see, they were happy here. It's the first international city race-wise, if you think about it, Joko said. It has more Jews than Tel Aviv and more Irish than Dublin, John said. And blacks and Chinese and Japanese, and they are all living pretty well together, Joko said. I don't know the statistics then, if it is true that there were more Jews in New York than in Tel Aviv. I don't know if that was true then. I don't know if it is true now. So I'm just reading what is written in here. But what I do understand and what I do agree is that they are talking about the diversity in this big city, which is something that here in Chicago also happens, and is something that I love. And that is something that actually, I'm going to tell you something. I am originally from Panama. And Panama, because of the story that we have, it's also a city full of diversity in terms of races. In our country, we have like Jamaican people, Indian people, people with backgrounds from Africa, Europe, etc. So when I come to a city like this, like Chicago or New York, I feel really comfortable. I love this type of city where there is so much mixes of cultures and everybody's culture is mixing with each other. Everybody's learning from each other. I love this type of vibe and I do understand what they are talking about. So let's keep reading. Right now, there is a fantastic pessimism, both in the art world and in the general society. Even the most intelligent people in New York are saying, oh, nothing is happening in New York. It's boring. Let's all go to the West Coast. That's the general tenor when we got here. We are sort of trying to change the wind to a more positive wind. I think all of us went through a big depression in the last year and a half all over the world, John said. All of this that they are saying makes me think of one thing. I don't know what was happening in there and why there is this big depression. I can imagine the reasons, but I cannot talk about it. They are not going deep into it, and I didn't live those times and I didn't research those times to do this episode, so I'm not going to say anything. However, I can say that it feels a little bit like these times in which we went through all the COVID era, and we are still a little bit on the COVID era, but like we have come from times in which nothing was happening, everybody was depressed, and no one's having a good time. Actually, we're now in what people call a crisis in all ways possible, and when they talk about this time in which they are getting to New York, in which people is thinking that New York is not that cool because the whole world is not that cool because everyone's having a bad time, it looks a lot like the times we're living right now. One thing that they mentioning here is that some people would say that the West Coast, meaning California, I don't know, those San Francisco, Los Angeles, was a better place to live, a better place for them to choose before New York. And at some points in history, I guess that balance have changed from one side to the other. Sometimes people think that LA is the best. Sometimes people say that New York is best. I think that right now something like that is happening. I think that years before from now, like 10 years ago, everybody like was in YouTube trying to do music, trying to do videos, any time of career in entertainment was going to LA, and now it looks like everybody's moving out of LA. So all of these topics come back to the same thing. Always is the same thing happening. I'm talking about an article written in the 1970s, and it looks like we're talking about today. It is pretty interesting, but it doesn't surprise me, and it shouldn't surprise you either. We think there is something in the air that is going to pick us up all again. New York is a fantastic place. Yoko is a New Yorker. She spent 15 years here before she met me, and she used to go on about New York to me all the time, but I had never really seen it. I mean, I guess he had been there, like with the Beatles, doing music, but never staying living there. That's what he means, I think. And I love when he said that he thinks that something good is going to happen and everybody is going to feel better. Because at the end of the day, is what we are always waiting for. I'm sorry, John. I think that you died and we're still looking for something great to happen. Sometimes we have had things that had happened that in general have been really positive for most people. But we always come back to hope, we live in base of hope, on things getting better for us. Which is basically life, right? Nothing is always going to be definitely good for no one. We're always gonna have obstacles. But I guess that in here he's talking in a way more general, like everybody's depressed, but something's gonna happen. To be honest, I don't know if back then something happened good that really made people happy. However, in a few years, what I know that happened to them is something bad, because his friends and Yoko and everybody that cared about John went to something really bad when he was killed. So I guess that I'm just saying that everything is up and down. I am just trying to compare those times to these times. So let's keep going. John keeps talking. I was overwhelmed by America in the early days when the Beatles were here because we were all brought up on Americana. Britain is the 59th state or whatever. I've never heard that, but that is an interesting concept. And America was the mother country of the whole culture. There is an unbelievably creative atmosphere on this little island of Manhattan. Like they say, there just isn't anything you can get in New York. It's a very rich island, Yoko said solemnly. I'm gonna tell you something. I have been to New York one time, and sometimes when I think about New York, at least in these times, and you tell me about creativity, I think more about Harlem, Brooklyn, and places like that, at least today. I've been in Manhattan, like I told you one time, and I don't feel like Manhattan, even with having everything that is there, is the center of creativeness now in these times in New York. I don't know if I'm wrong about that. If you are from New York, let me know what you think. Is Manhattan the most creative and the center of the universe that is New York? Is it Manhattan? Or is it more things happening in places like Harlem, Brooklyn? So let me know what you think because I don't know. I've been one time in there. It has everything you could possibly want, night and day. That's what I can't stand about England and Europe. It closes down unless you go to Hamburg or Amsterdam for the nightclub scene, which I don't enjoy, but New York never sleeps. If you had all the money in the world and you were in Spain or somewhere, what could you do with it? Said Joko. Here, there is no end to it. In a way, it's better to be poor in New York than rich in Spain or England, John said. Exactly, Joko said. I know what they are talking about in here. This is a cultural shock that I had when I moved to the city of Chicago. When I was living in the city of Panama, I don't know if you know this, but in there the supermarkets are 24 hours. And not only the supermarkets, most of restaurants are open until 11, 12, and I was used to live like that. I was used to get hungry at 11 and get out to a gas station that was close to my apartment and buy a hot dog at 11 p.m. When I got here, I was super open to the culture. I know that things were going to be different. But one of the things that was the most difficult for me is that the restaurants close. There are things in here, and this is a big city, but there are things in here in Chicago that at 8 close, at 9 close, even the supermarkets close. They are not 24 hours. I don't know if now, because I have a long time not going to supermarkets, to be honest, but that was something that had to change to my life, and I adapted to it, but it was an idea that I had that was different from my country to this city. New York, of course, is known as the place that never sleeps. However, I've been there one time, so I cannot even say anything about New York. I am just telling you my experience when I got into Chicago. I am adapted to that now. It's a different life and it works. It's just different. And when I got here the first time, it was a little bit difficult to adapt to that. Because if I wanted a hot dog at 11 p.m., I had to have the ingredients to actually cook it myself at 11 p.m. Joko keeps talking. I was an artist, come waitress, come lecturer in New York, and a superintendent also. She was the superintendent of the building Jerry Rubin's is living now. I don't know who is Jerry Rubin. I'm sorry, I'm so ignorant in some stuff. John said Jerry took us to see it, and it turned out to be a place where Yoko was superintendent 10 years ago. I was fired, Yoko said, and she left. One night I was having a concert at Carnegie Recital Hall, and I forgot to turn the incinerator on. All the garbage was stuck, and 2 days later I burned it, and the smoke was everywhere. And the fire department came, and I was fired. Of course, Yoko, you were fired for firing too much garbage at one time. I was a waitress and a cook in a macrobiotic restaurant. The Paradox. So the place is called the Paradox. Or she's saying that this is a paradox. I don't know. Is there a place called the Paradox where Yoko Ono used to cook and was a waitress at? Let me know. The critics would come to interview me about my concerts. She would serve them macro and then sit down with them and talk about her art, John said. I thought I was a very rich person then, because the city has that quality that even a waitress can feel rich about it, Joko said. This is an awesome idea, and I really, really like all of this concept. I think they are gonna start talking about all of those things that I really agree with. There is no said thing about your fate here. Your fate is what you create in this city. You know what? I am recently reading a book that is called Daisy Jones and the Six about a rock band. And I am around the middle of the book right now. And there was a topic that was discussed in this book that reminds me of this idea that there is no said things about your fate, that your fate is what you can create in this city. And the way that was talked about in that book was really interesting because it talks about the part in which that actually affects you, because you realize that even the things that can make the best moment of your life into the worst moment of your life, that those little things that can change your life for best or for better are things that you control. So basically, you have to trust yourself so much to know that you're not going to destroy your own life. And then when you realize that you are in control of keeping your life balanced, when you realize that, that could be either great or really cause a lot of anxiety in you. When you realize that you are in control of bad things happening to you too, you can change things for good to you, but you can also change things for bad to you. You can make things bad for you. And that is a crazy idea, and it's pretty scary if you think about it. And this is something that in the book Daisy Jones and the Six they were talking about. And this concept in here reminds me of that. And again, all of the same ideas that people had in the 70s, we have now, they had it in the 60s, and probably even in the 1920s, and they will have them still in the year 2100. Let's keep going. We said that the talk of riches reminded us of a recent song of Jones, Imagine, which asked the listener, among other things, to imagine no possessions. This is so interesting because they are talking about the song Imagining here as a recent song, when now is basically a classic, an anthem. I wish Imagine would come true, John said. I've been listening to it myself because I get an objective view after, and I was imagining. I began to think, I don't want the big house we built for ourselves in England. I wonder who is living in there now. I keep going. I don't want the bother of owning all these big houses and big cars, even though our company, Apple, pays for it all. What Apple is he talking about? Is he talking about Apple, the Apple that we know now? I don't know. So if you know, please let me know. Leave me a comment and 5 stars. All structures and buildings and everything I own will be dissolved and got rid of. This is not an idea that I have heard only from him. For example, Gloria Vanderbilt, the mother of Anderson Cooper, used to talk about ideas that sound a lot about these ideas that I'm reading right now from John Lennon and Yoko. I'll cash my chips, and anything that's left I'll make the best use of. Yoko is a three tatami woman, and she's been working on me to get rid of this possessions complex, which is something that happens to people who were poor like myself, not starving, but poor. We asked Yoko about her three tatami, and she said, one tatami is the length and width of a person lying down. So it's basically the space that you occupied at a certain instant. A friend of mine in Tokyo says that in today's society, with its overpopulation, this is interesting. So look at me now, a gay man talking about overpopulation in his podcast. Any person that believes conspiracies or any homophobe would be right now so happy that I'm talking about this. They would be, that's his agenda. That's the gay agenda. He's talking about overpopulation. He doesn't want kids to be born anymore. Well, let me tell you something. No, overpopulation is not a topic that I'm never talking about. As a gay man, the only thing that I think about is about existing, about respecting and be respected. Overpopulation, underpopulation is not a topic that I talk on a daily basis. Or never. Maybe I should, because I am a human being in this society, but I don't. The only gay agenda that I have is existing, staying alive. That's my only gay agenda. So let's keep going. A friend of mine in Tokyo says that in today's society, with its overpopulation, the natural space that a person can acquire without fighting or making unnatural efforts is 3 tatami. So basically, the space that you occupied in an instant multiplied by 3. Basically, that's the space that you can get without fighting. However, Yoko, I don't agree with this. I think that there is so much greed in the world that the more tatami that people get in life, the more tatamis they want, the more tatami they need, and the more they fight for it. Sadly, that's how greed works. I agree with you that 3 tatami should be enough, but it's not. It will never be for no one. So 3 tatami, one for himself to lie down, a second for his companion, and a third for them both to breathe in. Okay, so if you need a 3 tatami per person and you're gonna have a companion, then maybe you need 6 tatami per person because it's 2 people together. They both need a 3 tatami, so they are 6. I'm sorry, maybe I'm joking about this, but I'm not. I actually agree and respect this idea. Sadly, I don't agree that it's possible, at least not right now, with so much greed in the world. There is a kind of poverty where you have an excess of things. I agree with that. And all of your energy is directed toward getting and keeping them. Actually, that is also a sickness now. You know, all those people that can't get rid of things. All of their apartments are full of things that they don't even know what they have in the boxes. So yeah, I think it's considered a sickness right now. Overcrowding spaces, not letting things go. So yeah, that is a kind of poverty. John was poor and it was natural for him to strive for wealth. But I come from a background of excessiveness. It was very natural for me to live in New York in a bohemian way because I was trying to get away from that. So let's talk about this. Yoko says that she comes from a background of excessiveness. And I don't come from a background of excessiveness. I come from a background of middle class, the way that middle class was in the 90s in Latin America. And even in the middle class, in the place where I lived, I had a little bit more than a lot of the kids around. I never had trips anywhere. I wasn't taken to Disneyland. I wasn't taken anywhere. I didn't travel, never, until I was actually able to pay for that myself. But I was never hungry. I never needed anything that I wasn't able to have. I always have my gifts at Christmas. I always had best things than other kids. I didn't have a lot of things. I didn't have excessiveness, but I always lived comfortable. My parents worked pretty hard for that to be that way, because at least my father comes from a background of being pretty poor. But even then, when I wasn't that rich, when I wasn't rich at all, I do understand what Yoko said, and I do understand that when you grow up without needing things, or you come to a point, which is something that has happened to me recently, you come to a point in which you free yourself from things, from needing things. Right now, I need so much less than I would have need a few years ago. A few years ago, I was obsessed with saving for buying something from Versace or Louis Vuitton, because at the end of the day, I think that a lot of people, including the person I was back in the day, think that buying all of these big brands and getting all of these things that are not easy to get, that things validate you as a person. And then one day you realize that you don't need that you need so much less, and so much less often feels like so much more. And I compared that to someone that I have seen her videos on YouTube. I don't want to talk about my position on the situation of Cuba. I think that by living in the United States like I do, you may already guess where my position is about the situation in Cuba. However, recently, the videos of people from Cuba, like especially young people, that they are doing videos on YouTube since the moment that YouTube was opened in Cuba, it has become really interesting for people because you know that the situation in Cuba is something that people have always talked about, but it was still a mystery because we didn't have a lot of chances to listen to their people talking about all of this. And now with YouTube, we have all of these people, young people, talking about the realities of Cuba. And right now, what is happening is that the situation is, I don't know, I guess worse than ever, and a lot of people is leaving Cuba. You're gonna tell me, always people every year is leaving Cuba. Yeah. But this year, it seems like it was pretty bad and everybody's leaving. Like from 10 YouTubers that I knew, I can tell you that maybe 9 already left Cuba. And it looks, and they say openly, that everybody that is still there is trying to find a way to leave. And a lot of them are going for what I think are the right reasons, just because they want the freedom to be able to work, go to a supermarket and buy whatever they want. And because they want to go somewhere where it is not so difficult to get something as basic as food. But there is one girl that she dreams to come to the USA, and I notice in that specific girl that sometimes it feels that the most important thing for her is to come here to the USA and start wearing all those brands. And I do understand that because she never had nothing, she would be impressed by something like that. And that's the reason why I'm not going to criticize her. But I am mentioning this because this idea that Yoko shared in this interview that I just read reminds me of that. Because it's true. Because that girl didn't have nothing, she thinks she needs more than she actually needs. And me, because I actually had as much as I needed, I think that I kind of have a better idea of what I actually need. However, I think that it is a little narcissistic, at least, for me to come and say what I actually need and what that girl actually needs. But I am talking about this from my point of view. I hope you understand. Let's keep going with the interview. John was still preoccupied with his possessions. It's clogging my mind just to think about what amount of gear I have in England. Yeah, I do understand. I mean, you move to New York, you have a house full of things, and it is worrying like, what am I gonna do with all of those things? I cannot even sell the house because what am I gonna do with all of those things? However, you're John Lennon. I promise you, John Lennon, back then, that you would say, hey, come to my house and pick my things, and you were gonna have your house full of people helping you to get rid of all of your things. All my books and possessions, walls of books I've collected all my life. I'm gonna tell you something though, that is something that I have, and I don't have a lot of books anymore because a lot of books that I'm reading them in Apple Books or in Kindle. I do have a lot of paperback books, and my idea all my life has been that all the books that I read in my life, I wanted to have them for my kids, for when I have my own kids. And I still have that idea. I actually am wondering, how am I going to pass to my kids when I have them all the books that I have in my accounts in Apple Books, in Kindle, etc. That is actually something that I've been wondering a lot recently. However, yes, I do have a lot of books in paperback that occupied a lot of space. So I do understand this part about him. I do understand why you collect the books. I do understand why you want to get rid of them. I do understand why you want to donate them, maybe. But I'm also involved in the clogging my places with the books because of me trying to save them for my kids. It's a little bit confusing what I'm saying, but I do understand what he's talking about. I have at least this tick of the things I have in Ascot, and I'm going to tick off the things I really want, really need. The rest goes to libraries or prisons, the whole damn thing. That is a great idea too. I might keep my rock and roll collection, but even that I'm thinking about. I think that he's holding more to his collection of rock and roll than his collection of books. And in my case, I'm holding more to my collection of books because I want them for my kids. So it's a little bit different, but a little bit of the same concepts, ideas, and preoccupations, I guess. I identify a lot with them. In a lot of things, I agree with them. In a lot of things, I don't agree with them. Everything you have got in here looks like something you use, we say it. Yeah, because when they describe the apartment, what they have in there is like basically clothes, which you need to wear because you cannot be naked, which is something that I don't agree with. Maybe one day I'm going to talk about nudity, but I think that I am tending to become a little bit of a nudist at some point of my life. And also, like music equipment is what they had in there in that apartment because that's what they do. It's their work. They need guitars, they need instruments and equipment because that's what they do, music. I think that that's what he was doing, and I don't know if Yoko was doing different kinds of art, but everything that was described in the apartment seems like, yeah, it's something that they are using. Yeah, it's very casual, Yoko said. If we lost everything in here, we might be annoyed, but not to the point where it could. And now I change the page where it could affect our health. Yeah, I do understand. I mean, when you kind of get freed of that attachment to your possessions, yes, you need the things. Yes, they make you sad if you lose them, but you're not gonna get sick for that. I think that I am at a point in which, with a lot of my things, not everything, but a lot of my things, I'm like that. I think that the things that I value the most now are the things that love me back, like my husband, my family, my dogs. That's what I value the most. And maybe I sound too romantic right now or even narcissistic, but this is my podcast and I'm being honest. I like the idea of everything being transient, so that all is with me is somebody I love and myself. My God, they are saying the same things I'm saying. I have read this before, but I didn't remind it on the detail. I just remembered that I actually agree with a lot of things that I read in this article. And actually, yes, I do. We asked the Lennons how they like their new neighborhood, and Yoko said it's so good. It's like a quaint little town. Yes, it's like a little Welsh village with Jones the fish and Jones the milk, and everybody seems to know everybody, John said. This is a pretty interesting concept, and you know what it reminds me of? I remember a couple of years ago reading the biography of Dapper Dan, which I really, really love. And I remember that in this book, he kinda tells the story of his family, but like really from the past. And one of the things he tells in there, Dapper Dan, is that he starts by telling the story of the black people that moved from the South to Harlem after the Civil War. He talks in deep about this, but I am right now just mentioning it superficially. But basically, he says that after the Civil War, a lot of black people moved from the South to Harlem in New York. And what he says is that in those buildings in Harlem, what happened was that every building would have the people that came from the same town. So in one building, you would have all the people from the town where you came from. So you would know everybody, you would talk to everybody because you know the people from your town. Then the building next to it would be people from another town that you maybe knew, maybe you don't, but all of the people in that building know each other because they come from the same town, which is another town. So basically what Dapper Dan says in there is that every building was a little town. And that is an idea that I just remember when John Lennon here is comparing neighborhoods in New York with little towns in Europe. People don't grab us when we walk in the village, Yoko said. They sort of smile from a distance, which is nice, obviously, because they know who John Lennon is, obviously. But yeah, I guess it's not LA in the 2000s full of paparazzi. We stand out more in Britain than in America as a mixed marriage couple, John said. Okay, what is he saying here? That in America they stand more because they are mixed race? than because they are people that everybody knows from TV and magazines. I don't totally understand what they are saying here. John keeps talking. Although there is race hatred in America, you see more different colored people in America than in Britain. Even the white people are different colors here, we said. Yes, there are all shades, all different kinds of descent, he said. In England, everybody south of Calais is woke. I don't know what is a woke is. WOOG. I don't know what it means. And that includes the French and the Italians. Okay, this is an interesting idea, and maybe it could be a little bit difficult to talk about it, but I think that a lot of the racism that was seen in there, that they were seeing, and that we still see, is because people is afraid. If you are born in a place in which you either didn't have any contact with people that look different than you, or you did, but you had people around you telling you or teaching you to be scared of people or everybody that looks, acts, move different than you, then you're gonna be scared. And I think that racism is basically based on fear, ignorance, and envy. Because I think that when we talk about homophobia, for example, I'm sorry for saying this, but I am saying it from my point of view, from my own experience as a homosexual man. The people with the most homophobia for me are just as gay as me, just upset because I found a way to be a little bit more free and open about my reality than they did. When you care too much about gay men, there is a reason for that. That can be envy, that can be fear, because I just remind you what you know you are, but you are not able to deal with. And then when we talk about race, I have said before, I come from a country in which a lot of us, or most of all, are interracial. All the families are interracial families. My family is interracial in all ways. Mostly black and white people. And all my cousins were like that. I have cousins that are black, I have cousins that are white, and I have cousins that are more like me, like a little bit of a mix between black and white. I think that black people wouldn't consider me black, and I think that white people could never consider me white. And the way that my family raised me, there were a lot of bad things, but I can tell you something. In the place where I come from, there is not as bad racism against black people like in other places we know about. There is racism against black people. But in Latin America, black people and white people are so mixed that no one's afraid of someone looking different than you because you have been always exposed to everybody. Racism in Latin America, and this is my opinion as someone from Latin America, racism in Latin America is worst against indigenous people, which is horrible because indigenous people is the people that actually was here first, okay? And that is wrong in all ways possible. Now, all of these topics are more exposed on the media, so even if you haven't lived around black people, you already understand that we are all equal, that we are all the same, and that you shouldn't be scared of no one that walks, acts, or looks different than you. Complicated topic. I basically want to say it. I am against racism, against everyone, black, white, indigenous people. And it does happen, and it happens everywhere. A little less on some places, a little more in some other. So if you're here in this podcast and you're a racist, you're in the wrong place. Let's keep going. John has a New York temperament in his work, Yoko said. Liverpool is very much like New York for an England city. Liverpool is the port where the Irish got on the boat to come over here. Did the Titanic left from Liverpool? I'm not sure about that, but I think I may be right. Also, one of the movies that I like the most in my life, Across the Universe, which is based on the music of the Beatles, there are scenes in those ports, which I think are the ports in Liverpool. But I'm not sure again. Liverpool is the port where the Irish got on the boat to come over here. And the same for the Jews and the blacks, John said. The slaves were brought to Liverpool and then shipped out to America. That is horrible. On the river from Liverpool, you can still see the rings in the side where they were chained up. Oh my God. Slavery is the most disgusting thing that human beings ever did. And I think that in some ways, if you think about it, it's still happening. Sometimes it's pretty visible, sometimes it's not that visible. But yes, the worst type of slavery, we know which one it is. It was horrible what they did. I hope that it never happens again. And it should never happen again. Wow, a lot of controversial topics in this episode. We got the records, the blues and the rock, right off the boats, and that's why we were advanced musically. In Liverpool, when you stood on the edge of the water, you knew the next place was America. All About the Records is a pretty great piece of history that I didn't know about. I never thought about it like that. The sun was setting and the television set glowed more brightly. On the screen, a gigantic lizard was crunching Times Square underfoot. I don't know what movie they are talking about in here. If you know, let me know. Do you like watching television without the sound? We ask. TV to me is like what the fireplace used to be, John said. You always get these surreal things happening. I used to watch the fire as a child, but since they took the fire away from us, I don't know what he means by they took the fire away from us. Or it is just that in their apartment that they are living in this moment in New York, they don't have a fireplace. So I don't know what he's saying here. I have decided that TV is it. It's like the window, only this picture continually changes. You will see China and the moon all in 10 minutes. I know what he means about a TV on being a little bit like a fireplace. I totally do understand it. And I totally do understand how it benefits when you're being creative. When you're being creative in a place that is closed and is so static, it kind of blocks you in some cases. And I think that what the TV or the fire do is keep everything in movement. Sometimes, if you're writing, listening to music does that for you, but in sound. It keeps the things moving. Because in my case, if I'm writing in total silence, in total loneliness, I think I could go crazy. If I spend 20 hours writing in total silence, I would just go nuts, for real. So I don't understand what he's talking about. You will see real, surreal, strange, psychedelic everything in the TV. We got up to go and say goodbye to Yoko. John walked us to the door, peered out cautiously. I don't know cautiously why. Maybe he didn't want other people to listen to him or to see him, people from the same building, and came out on the stoop with us for a moment. And then he says to them, everywhere is somewhere and everywhere is the same. Really, and wherever you are is where it's at, he said. But it's more so in New York. It does have sugar on it. And I've got a sweet tooth. All of this article is by Hendrik Hertzberg. I have to say that I think that what he's saying at the end is that whatever you want to do, you can do it wherever you are. You just have to go and do it. And wherever you are at a moment is the best place to do whatever you need to do. But, in his opinion, New York is better because, like he says, it has sugar. That's his opinion. And that is for sure the opinion of many, many, many people. And that's about it. That's the article. We finish it. Thank you for listening if you're here. Do you know what? It's so interesting how an article that was written and published 50 years ago feels so current and how it can be the base for us talking about so many topics that are so current. It's pretty interesting. As I told you through the whole episode, these are all my own opinions. If you have anything to comment about that, let me know. I know that I don't have an Instagram account yet and I don't have a comment section on these platforms, but you can write a positive comment if you want and leave me a review, and in the review tell me what you think about the article and comment whatever you want to comment. If you do it, I will read it on a future episode. And basically that's it. It's a simple episode in which we ended up talking about a lot of topics. I think that I started wanting to talk about the relationship of Yoko and John Lennon. And I ended up talking about slavery, racism, homophobia, the political situation in Cuba. This is insane how many topics I ended up talking about. And this is really interesting because I was just trying to talk about two people in love. You know what I mean? That's why they are so iconic. That's why all of these people from these eras are so iconic, because they were always involved in so many things. And that's why they are so interesting. I just want to ask you again, add my podcast to your favorite ones. I hope you like this episode. I wanted to talk about this relationship from a different point of view. Probably it's not the last time that I'm going to talk about them, but this is a good start, I think. And this makes us think a lot about what they together meant back then. Because if today, just talking a little bit about them, made us thought about so many things, now imagine back then. I could have talked about the chronology of their relationship, but I basically talked about the way they were living, the things they had in common, the ideas they had in common, and I think it's a pretty cool thing to do. Talk about a relationship, but from the things they have in common instead of the events that were important in their life. Again, add my podcast to your favorite ones. Leave me a good review, a good comment. Come back for the next episode. Thank you for staying. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. Come back for the next episode. Bye.